think we are ready to rock and roll.
Really? Everyone already back?
Is everyone back? I can see. Yeah.
Cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Alice. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself just to kick us off, just so you have an idea of what I'm doing here. I'm 31 years old. I'm Dutch. I live in Berlin. I'm engaged to an Australian. I artists, festivals, tours, anything really, for a few years, and then I have an education in art and economics, which is like a school of the arts education that teaches you to really focus on both managing and marketing cultural projects. That's how I rolled into music. After that, I did a master's in new media and digital culture, which is a specialization of media studies where you mostly learn about all the endless opportunities of the internet, the dystopic aspects, the utopian aspects, everything that can make it either really horrible or really great, or often both and everything in between. And then I moved to Berlin and I started working in the startup scene where I worked for Beta House, which it's a startup hotspot and co-working space with innovation events, hardware laboratory. We had a woodworking shop and I ran that and it was all going great. And I got a promotion to become their COO. And then I thought, I'm not sure if I want to do it. And so I quit my job and I searched for a while for what it was that I wanted to do. And the thing that I came out on was that I wanted to do something that was a bit more engaging in the world, something that was a bit more centric to the way we live, the way we connect with each other as humans. And so I started looking at jobs for NGOs. So I ended up getting a job at Avaz, which is a global campaigns group, and I'll tell you a bit more about it in a minute. But I think the interesting part for many people is that when I applied for them, I really had no clue what activism really was. So when I thought about activism, I thought of something like this, just a lot of people taking it to the streets, protesting for something that they felt important, requesting change, demanding new policy. I thought of people blocking distribution machinery of coal mines, people breaking into slaughterhouses, people chaining themselves to construction equipment. But anything else that wasn't so visible, I didn't really know much about. And so when I applied to Avaz, I really went into a journey of figuring out what activism meant and what campaigning really was. To tell you a little bit about Avaz. Avaz is a global citizens movement with about 65 million members now. We campaign on anything from climate change to human rights to net neutrality, disinformation, really you name it, anything that happens in the world and that we get input from our members on that most people in the world are disagreeing with or hurt them in any way, we can campaign on. And in many ways, you could compare us to Greenpeace or Oxfam or WWF. But the thing that I think really sets us apart is that we, first of all, of course, are not stuck to one issue. We work on many issues. The other thing, though, is that we are member funded. So all the money we get comes from small donations from people that either make monthly donations or donate for one particular campaign or one particular fundraiser that they care about. And that means that we can work really quick, and our model just allows to really jump on a moment. So something happens in the world and we're usually one of the first ones that can just interact because we have no one that we need to be responsible to except for the members who we can simply pull at 12 o'clock midnight and have feedback back on in 3-4 hours. So that's what we do. I'm going to take a step back. I want to talk a little bit with you guys about activism and what it means. Sorry, I think I'm getting pebbles things probably on WhatsApp. I'm going to put the sound up. I will tell you a little bit more about campaigning and how campaigning for most NGOs works. And the reason I want to talk about that is that then afterwards, I'm hoping to talk more about images. So art, design, photography, film, any type of, interactive project that you can do online, and how all those sorts of things can kind of connect back into activism and campaigning, and how you can use it to create change in the world. So look, activism. I'm very curious what you guys think when you think activism, and don't Google it. What do you think it is? What would be your first gut definition of activism? Can everyone just write something in the chat? Can also be a word if you just have like a connotation. Get angry for good, take action, standing up for a cause, acting on behalf of something. Yeah, take a stance, working for a better future. Yeah, that all comes pretty close. I think they're all good answers, actually. Doing, values. Yep. Okay, great. That's great. So I looked it up actually before this call. Wait, there we go. And it says, according to Cambridge, it's the use of direct and noticeable action to achieve a result. And then I thought, well, that's great. That doesn't really tell me anything at all. So I looked for the second one, which said the policy or action of using vigorous campaigning to bring about political or social change. Now, I'm not sure how many of you are, familiar with campaigning, but again, when I started, the only campaigning I knew was marketing and advertising campaigning. So campaigning, again, according to the dictionary, is working in an organized and active way towards a particular goal. So it could be anything, right? You can do it for any organization. You can do it for a car. You can do it for perfume. You can do it for a supermarket, or you could do it for climate change or human rights, and usually something a bit smaller than that. So I think the thing is, like I said, I don't think you need to work at an NGO like Greenpeace or, WWF or anything to make change. You can do a lot while working in other types of companies like advertising agencies, design studios, financial institutions. And in many cases, if you just have one person who is a bit aware of how these things work and who dares to speak out bravely and honestly, who goes the extra mile to come up with a new or an alternative idea to present something, I think that can make a huge difference in the world. So let's talk about campaigning. Where do you start? I think the starting point is always the same, and it starts with what you want to change, what problem you're trying to solve. And that usually starts with an issue. Many people have an issue they care about, right? Some people care about climate, some people care about equality or human rights, or, you name it. So maybe, again, I'd love to just hear it in the chat what your first reaction is to the issue. If you could change one issue in the world, what would you change? You can pick it big or small. Trump. Let's see, guys. 8 days until the elections. Injustice, poverty, education, racial inequality, animal rights, awareness, human rights, climate. Okay. Okay, that's great. Okay, so as I said, and I think you guys, this is probably pretty clear, like when we say things like we want to fix climate change, it's as big as saying we want world peace, right? It's not something you can just make happen. And so as campaigns groups or, civil rights organizations, whatever you want to, whatever it is that you work for, whatever you want to call it, usually you start with a campaign by spotting a crisis in a certain topic and an opportunity to create change. So to give you an example of what that could look like, if you care about climate change or biodiversity, Total, the energy giant, is right now building the biggest heated oil pipeline in the world in Uganda and Tanzania. And it has many problems, actually. It destroys important ecosystems, it displaces 10,000 people, farmers are just thrown off their land without, a proper, proper money to live somewhere else. It destroys nature reserves. And on top of that, it's such a big pipeline that it actually makes it much harder to tackle climate change in the years to come. So the opportunity here, there's many again, but the main one is that Total actually brands itself saying that they're a responsible energy mayor and that they've just publicly committed to going net zero by 2050, which is another way of saying that by 2050, they want to have no emissions in comparison to the 1990s, which is what all the climate science is kind of based on. And of course, if they have this massive pipeline that they're building, they're not going to be able to say, it doesn't rhyme with saying they're a responsible energy mayor, and definitely they're not going to be able to go net zero by 2050, because for years to come, it would put emissions out into the world. So this kind of gives you a first sense of, okay, you have something that goes wrong and you see something that doesn't rhyme with it that you could use in order to create pressure on a company. The second thing in campaigning is that you look for the key decision maker. Sometimes there's many, most of the time there's one of two people who can really make the difference. And, it can be a politician in some cases like Angela Merkel, but in other cases it's a CEO like Patrick Pouyanné of Total. And once you know who that decision maker is, you want to know everything about them. And this is going to sound weird to some of you, but you want to know who these people are. You want to literally know what you eat for breakfast. At Avaz, we call this a breakfast research. You want to know where they live, how they live, if they have hobbies and what their hobbies are, if they work out, what they eat for breakfast, who their friends are, what books they read, what media they read, who they're connected to. That's kind of the personal stuff. But then you also ideally want to know who pays them, who are they responsible to, what investors is their company dependent on, what law do they abide to, so what headquarters are they in, what different company or like what different countries do they have spin-off agencies in. And when you know all of those sorts of things, you can start working towards a power map or an actor map. So again, you want to know how you're going to influence this person to do something different, right? And in order to get to them, you need to know who's around these people. And it could be anything from investors to stakeholders to governments to users and consumers. Board of directors is often a big one for big companies. And once you know that, you find a moment. So at this point, you have an issue you care about. You've spotted like a crisis happening within that with an opportunity to change. You know who the key decision maker or the key decision makers are. You know as much as you can about them so that you can connect with them in a personal way. You can talk with them on eye level. You can argue with them based on what they believe in and not only what you believe in. You know what moments are coming up, and based on that, you can start thinking about a strategy, right? I think another, like, just to give you a few more examples, like in climate, for instance, the EU climate law right now is something that a lot of organizations are pushing for. So we have this massive problem of climate change. We only have, really a few years to fix it. It's not like the world's just gonna, blow up in one day, but if we don't do it in time, there's going to be tipping points that make it all a lot more complex and a lot harder to solve, and some things won't be able to be solved anymore. And so we have really until 2030 to cut emissions by half, and then until 2050 we need to just eradicate them altogether. And so there's this climate law in the EU that the EU is really excited about, where by 2030 they want to cut emissions in half. But then of course there's a lot of other actors involved that don't want this. So this is the kind of moment, I'm not going to go into it too deep, but this is the kind of moment where you have an issue, you have a clear moment, you have clear decision makers, you can figure out who the blockers are, who the champions are, how they relate to each other, and you can come up with a strategy. So often campaigning feels like a game of dominoes. You have this problem or this issue, and you know, you start pushing at one point, and sometimes it's, you know, all in one row. Sometimes it's much more like multi-pronged, and you want to attack something from all sides. And you hopefully will be able to change the key people that are influencing an issue. I'm going to pause there again. Also, please let me know if I'm talking too fast. Am I? Can someone put up their hand? I can only see 6 people now. All right. Okay, great. I'm not sure if this is a good moment to ask you. So if you think about your issue, do you have any clue, like, does this give you an idea of like what questions you would ask yourself, and what a strategy, you know, could look like, or at least, you know, what you would start thinking about? Maybe again, if you feel like it, put something in the Skype chat. I will slowly move on because I'm kind of assuming that this is something that needs a little bit more time. So maybe we'll save it for the end. Pebbles, stop me if you think I'm
No
wrong.
worries. And if at some point you think that you have a question that you like them to think in smaller groups, I can assign them into breakout rooms randomly. So then we can give them some time to discuss for like 5-10 minutes, and then we return and to share. So as you wish. So let's keep this a bit like comfortable.
Okay, that's great. All right. Okay, great. Okay, so let me just give you an idea of Total. This is a campaign that I recently worked on, and that's why it's an easy one for me to pull up, because I still have it all in my head. So for the Total pipeline, it is the strategy that we developed was really, and not only us, a lot of organizations are involved in this, is really what you would call a multi-pronged campaign. So in this case, you had a legal avenue in France, which is the headquarters of Total, where Friends of the Earth, another you know, organization in the climate movement, is suing Total, saying that they have a duty of vigilance. And what that means is that basically they are being negligent to the danger that they are causing people. So it works a little bit like a liability insurance for most people, right? If you hit another car, you have an insurance and you have to pay for it, right? And it works the same in many countries. As an organization or as a business, you're not allowed to just do whatever you want. If you could have known that you were going to, you know, put someone in danger with it. And so they're suing Total there, saying that what they're doing with this pipeline is putting in danger so many people, and they're doing it knowingly and willingly, and therefore they should be making changes. That's just one. That's one tactic. Another one is pressure on the ground. There's lots of activist groups in Uganda and Tanzania rallying right now and protesting and doing everything they can physically to stop the pipeline. There's a governmental avenue where we are involved in advocacy, like direct advocacy with Uganda, Tanzania, and France. For those of you who don't know what advocacy is basically the opposite of lobbying. So big companies around the world put billions of money into lobbying, right? The meat industry, it used to be the cigarette industry. There's lots of them, but they have lobbyists, and they have big teams of them that basically go to governments and, you know, present why they think that their rights aren't being upheld, and that do everything they can to convince governments that, you know, there's a good reason why. I don't know, like right now, one is why we shouldn't be calling vegan products things like vegan meat, or you can't call something soy milk, because according to the meat and dairy industry, people will all get confused and say, oh no, I thought this was cow milk. That's one way, right? And so the other side of that is that you have activist campaigns groups, civil society organizations that do the same thing, and that also try to get meetings with government, and that also send them letters and say, actually, you shouldn't be listening to the lobbyists, because the lobbyists aren't here for the people, and these are the, you know, X, Y, and Z reasons why we believe you should do something completely different. Another one is employee rebellion. I will talk about this more later, but there's a bunch of employees at Total that actually saw our campaign, didn't know about the pipeline, and said, this is outrageous, we want to write to the CEO, and who are, you know, thinking about doing something internally to, you know, at least raise this as an issue they disagree with. There's a public awareness piece. Many companies who do something that's just not completely right will obviously do everything they can to keep it under the radar. And as is the case with Total, they will have a beautiful greenwashed, website that looks like they're doing all these great things on climate change, and then, behind closed doors, there's very different things happening. And so we at Avast, for instance, now we have a petition with over 1 million signatures calling on the CEO to stop the pipeline. And there's something around just publishing power and raising awareness for an issue. Then there's a media attention piece, and there's direct actions. Media, I think, is clear. It's advertisements in big newspapers. Direct actions is usually that you you ask citizens to write to the CEO directly or to tweet to them, something like that. That's a strategy piece. I'd say the elements that you always have in a strategy that are important is that the first ones for me is always connection. There's a lot of activism in the world that starts from a place of anger, and I'm here talking for myself, so I'll speak for myself, but I don't think that is usually the best way to get people to move. If you get angry and you just speak from your own point of view, it's very easy to make people very angry and for them to feel like they just don't want to talk to you. And so you want to start from a place where you can connect with people on something. You don't need to agree with them, but you want to search for something where you can, say like, okay, this is your argument and this is why I don't believe in that specific argument. There's a piece that's a hero's journey. If you disagree with someone and you don't give them room to change or to go from the villain to the hero, why would they do anything, right? And so in almost all campaigns that we run at Avast, at least, there will be an opportunity for people to do the right thing. We will call on them to be, the climate leader we need them to be. We will ask them to, do the right thing and, make sure that human rights are upheld. But we will ask them to go from this place of doing something bad to going to the place of doing something good. That's the kind of light side of it, you could say. The other side, of course, is around pressuring them and having some sort of threat involved, right? So as you can see in Total's case, like there's a legal threat for them there that if they don't make a change, they, could be in trouble legally. They could, lose customers over it. They could lose face and credibility over it, all those sorts of things. So does it work? It's the one thing for a lot of these campaigns is that it's hard to say if it works, because there's obviously, it's not like an A/B test you can run and say, oh, if we do this, then this will happen, right? There's always a lot of different things happening in the world, and something will happen, someone will make a change, and then that like countless of movements and organizations have been pushing for it for years, and you can say, okay, this probably worked, but it's never a simple yes or no. But just to make, to give you a few examples, like Facebook is finally, after lots of campaigning from Mozilla, from Avast, from, what are they called? Humane Tech Center, is finally starting to implement tweaks in their algorithm to stop the spread of fake news. They're finally putting, corrections up for people who've seen harmful disinformation, whether that is about elections or anything else. A somewhat smaller, in some way, at least less complex example is the EU a few years ago banned all bee-harming pesticides after a lot of movements and a lot of citizens rallied for it, after it became, clear that bees were dying across the world and it was going to become a really big problem. Also for our food production. A massive one is, of course, the Paris Climate Agreement. I hope you all know what it is. It came into force in 2015 and basically has almost all countries in the world signed up to a goal to reduce emissions and to bring them back to zero by 2050 to make sure that our future generations still have a livable planet. So yeah, altogether, you could say that it works. I think this is all. This is all that I'm going to say about kind of campaigning at large. I hope this gives you kind of like a bubble to think about this. Like, I don't think you need to, know how to run a campaign right now, but I'm hoping that it gives you some sort of sense of the type of questions that you could ask yourself when you want to think about this thing. Okay, I want to dive into the second part.
Or Alice, or do you have a question for them till this part before the
Yeah, I'm thinking about that. So maybe you guys can tell me what you think. So we could do like a breakout room, say 5 to 10 minutes in small groups, maybe even pairs, to just think about something and try if you can come up with a super basic campaign or strategy. But I'm not sure if that is if that sounds right, or if it's just too much information too quick.
Well, I think if it's a breakout room, like given the size right now and also the time, that is a big question.
Okay, great.
The strategy, but maybe a small one
yeah. I think we're going to get into more questions. I think this was the heavy part of things. I'm hoping.
Any questions thus far before she proceeds?
I have a question. When you talked about like finding information on the key decision makers, like how do you go about that? Like, do you have a specific method, or how do you find all this like information?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. So you can of course always Google things, but in many cases, Googling things takes a lot of time. And so what we do a lot is we call other people. Usually when you read an article about, a company doing something, there are spokespeople there. And they're usually very willing to tell you more about, who's involved and what they think, and, what kind of pressure they think a leader is susceptible to. Some leaders really don't give anything about, for instance, their social media presence, right? And other leaders put a lot of time and effort in it, have teams on it, and really hate it when you send them 500 tweets. So you want to know who kind of responds to what. And the best way to figure that out is to just call people who are, in the movement and probably have countless of conversations with people to figure this stuff out. And then there's Google for sure, and interviews. I personally watch a lot of interviews. I think just watching an interview gives you a very good just feeling of who someone is, right? And like how someone talks about something. Yeah, it's harder to lie in an interview than it is to lie on, the front page of your website, your landing page.
I've got a quick one just to like be clear. So this is more like targeted towards like companies, right? Normally, I get the vibe that it's. I'm not sure. I guess that's what I'm asking. Is it more targeted towards companies?
No, it's not. Or? It's not. I was actually considering giving you guys an example about the EU, but the problem is that when we talk about governments, things usually get a bit more complex because you have different, for instance, in the case of the EU, you have a parliament, you have a council, you have a commission, then you have heads of state, environmental ministers. And so to kind of take that as an example felt like maybe it was going to be a bit much, because then there's going to, be questions about what the difference between the rights, the power of the council and the commission is and all these things. That's kind of part one of the answer. The other part is that there's obviously a lot of countries in the world that you can influence that have democratic governments. But then there is, I guess, a majority of countries in the world that don't have democratic governments and democratic systems. And so those governments are a lot harder to influence, right? Like like, for instance, campaigns targeting China or Russia are incredibly rare because they're not responsive to it. Yeah, the US used to be a place where you could do more. Since Trump is in office, honestly, that's become a lot harder, I think, for obvious reasons. But it goes back and forth. We do a lot of campaigning in the EU. EU is really like an island in the world right now that is democratic and where you can push for change and where you can stand up for the rights of normal people and ask people to consider it. But it's becoming more rare at the moment. Maybe in 8 days, I will say something different. Yeah.
Can I ask, what about in Latin America, for example?
Yeah, we have more campaigns there. I need to honestly say that I'm less across them, but we have a bunch of really great campaigners in Latin America, mostly in Brazil, that are doing a lot of work there. We've been running a bunch of globals on the Amazon. We currently have one that probably, I'm not sure if it just went out or if it's going out this week, that is trying to get the EU to boycott any products that are linked to deforestation in the Amazon. Yeah, there's things possible there for sure. But again, if you would do something around Latin America, it depends very much on the country, right? But for instance, if we talk about Brazil, the way you would target Brazil is by asking the EU to implement sanctions, because targeting Bolsonaro is, you know, I'm open to all possibilities. I'm not saying there's a right or a wrong answer here right now, but it's not the easiest you know, theory of change to try and get him to change his mind on something. Whereas if you have a really important trade deal between Brazil and the EU, you could ask the EU to say, look, we're not going to go ahead with this trade deal that he cares massively about unless he stops deforestation and stops, you know, killing the indigenous rights, the indigenous people who live there and who are trying to protect their land and fight for it. So that's kind of how how that shifts.
Would you say that the trade deal then lands under pressure or threat, or both?
It's a bit of everything. I think there's always there, you know, like when I say threat and pressure, it kind of in a way means the same thing, right? Like we're not going to threaten the EU. If you don't do this, then we're coming after you, right? But there is a threat that if they go ahead with this trade deal, that we're not going to be able to meet the goals we set in Paris and that they obliged to, that they committed to. And so if they don't fix the trade deal, you know, everything that they have in the works right now, everything that they're doing to make this target and make sure that we have a livable planet might be for nothing, because we need the Amazon, right? We need that's like the main piece that I think works for the EU. If the Amazon burns down, we basically, the world starts missing one of its lungs, which means that you need to reduce CO2 emissions even further in order to be able to stop kind of climate catastrophe, right? Same with the oceans. If the oceans get super polluted and all the plants living on the bottom of the oceans, the oceans absorb 1/3 of all global emissions in the world, if I'm not mistaken. So, you know, that's kind of how the threat then works. Like, if you don't do this, this might happen.
I thought more of like what would be applied towards Brazil, for instance. So maybe towards the government of Brazil, for instance, like by getting the EU to boycott certain products that leads to deforestation, that might apply pressure or a threat to them. And maybe what you could push to get the EU to go ahead with this would be like sending them on a hero's journey. Like, if you do this, that would be great for the earth.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, so in this case, the hero's journey would be more focused on the EU doing the right thing and not so much on Bolsonaro, because he's just a less movable target for us right now. The threat is mostly on his end, and it's mostly a financial, like an economic threat. Yeah. With some leaders, you can definitely, you know, try and go for that piece of connection and hero's journey, but you need to make a wise calibration on whether or not that is a likely, realistic, winnable kind of campaign you're pushing for then. All right, so we go on.
Yes.
Pebbles? Yeah?
Yes.
All right.
I'm
happy to talk about it more in the end as well.
we have
hoping
more
we'll
time
have some
for
time.
questions in the later part. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. All right, guys. So I want to talk a bit about what I think you could do. Like, I don't know any of you. I don't know any of your backgrounds, but there is a bunch of things that that you can do that you don't need to work for, you know, an NGO or civic movement for. And so I kind of want to split it up in 3 parts. The first part is connected to campaigns work, and it's kind of about how we use art, photography, and design as an essential part of campaigning. That is the case for us, but it's the case for all NGOs, I would say. Then I want to talk a little bit about culture campaigning, and then about employee rebellion. So pushing for change from the inside of a company. So let's start with the first. So here, this is about like kind of public art installations. Other people call it stunts, to create a news moment and contribute to long-term pressure. So as you might expect, a lot of leaders don't like being put in the spotlight when something's going wrong under their watch, right? And so media pressure is a really, really important tool. However, a lot of problems aren't solved overnight, and something outrageous will happen that there will be a clear image for, but then the policy change might take months, if not years, to push for. And the only reason, or like the only way that you're going to get a good outcome of that policy is if you somehow are able to keep the pressure up over a longer period of time. Now, there's different tactics there, but one of them is definitely media attention. So to give you an example, after the Sandy Hook shootings in the US, there was a huge outrage in media. It was all over the news for, I think, 1 or 2 weeks. And then it kind of died out again. And that happened a few times after school shootings. So what we did with Avaz is we put 7,000 shoes on the Capitol lawn in front of the White House to represent the children that have been killed by gun violence. And in this case, it created a moment for media to write about something again. So it kind of creates a news moment. So you'll see like Time wrote about it, CNN wrote about it, here Business Insider picked it up, and they're all headlining with the stunt. That is the news in this case. You know, Reuters picked it up. That is kind of part one. The other part is around symbolizing invisible issues. So I don't need to tell any of you that, you know, it's very rare these days that you'll read an article online that doesn't have any image. There's always an image, right? But some things are quite invisible. So an invisible issue, quote unquote, would be the Uyghurs in China, where there is, you know, over 1 million people being detained, but they're being detained behind closed doors. And we know that they're being tortured. We know that they're basically, you know, used as slaves, but there is no photography. There's no visuals. And if there would be, then maybe this wouldn't be the case anymore, because we've known about this issue for, I would say, almost 1.5 years, right? But it is invisible. And so there's very little pressure, very little outrage, you know, and that makes that the issue isn't being changed. Another one of those is disinformation. Disinformation is literally killing people in some places, right? There's been cases in Myanmar where there was fake news going around about people who would have, like, it was about pedophilia, I think, and like countless young men got killed by mobs of people who had seen this on WhatsApp, even though it was completely fabricated. They had no clue what was happening to them. It's hijacking elections, as many of you know. Like, there are some people that say that without disinformation, Trump may not even have been elected into office, because it's so much, you know, thriving on kind of conspiracy theories and just plain fake news. So this is another issue where we felt like we could do something. And this is kind of a, I mean, call it a stunt, call it an art installation, probably something in the middle, where we set up a fake army of Mark Zuckerbergs to flood the Capitol, just as fake news was kind of flooding social media and flooding the democracies. It was kind of winking to like the armies of bots that were at the time, at least actually still are, distributing most of the fake news. And as you see here, it's like, it looks quite small, right? But then when you see the photo, it actually becomes more impressive. And so here, it started as a moment that was already there. We did this stunt ahead of Mark Zuckerberg testifying in front of Congress. But then it got picked up and it got used over and over for completely different, you know, news. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm gonna try if I can get this to stop. sorry, that's Signal. So you'll see here that you know, this initial stunt was done in the beginning of 2018, and it just keeps being used over and over across the world. So here, this is Time again. This is the South China Morning Post about, you know, Mark Zuckerberg saying something about AI fixing fake news. Here it was used to head an article about a class action lawsuit challenging data and facial recognition issues. Right. Here we kind of reuse the same, you know, Mark Zuckerberg's in the EU, ahead of the EU, then interviewing Mark Zuckerberg about disinformation. And now even in 2020, so that's 2.5 years later, it's still used, for instance, here by USA Today to talk about disinformation ahead of the 2020 elections. And so you can see how, in this case, the image wasn't so much used to create a news moment, but it was created so that it could function for news moments, and so that people have something else than, you know, like a hand holding a cell phone to visualize an issue. Another one that we often have is hard-hitting ads. So this one, for instance, was targeting President Macron. In this case, it's about that climate law that we talked about before, where, you know, Germany is really pushing for it. Some of the Nordic states are pushing for it in Europe, but Macron, like France, is kind of the heavyweight in Europe that has a lot of like power, both in terms of negotiation, but also in terms of, you know, like just like size, like geopolitically, it matters a lot. And Macron wasn't doing anything. And so he kind of played with this idea that Macron's ratings in France are very much down. He's down in the polls for a long time now. Economically, France isn't doing very well. Like there's a lot of like critique on how they've been handling the corona, and now kind of like this big agreement, this Paris climate agreement, that kind of stands or falls with whether there's a climate law that commits us to what we said back then in 2015. He's kind of letting it sink, even though France was one of the big countries that really made it happen. Talking about culture campaigning, I think gets a bit more interesting, hopefully. A lot of what we do in campaigning is around representing something in a different way, right? So it's a lot about like how things are represented really influence how we see the world, how we then act in the world, how we vote, and what we become. And you can think of big and small things here, right? Like we can think about like whether a dinner table for Christmas in advertising shows a big chicken in the middle of the dinner table or not, and whether we therefore feel like we should be having a big chicken or turkey, whatever it is, on the dinner table during such events. There's of course much bigger issues like someone once told me, I haven't fact checked this, but I remember being astonished by it, that in films, if you show like a general street, like in New York, for instance, you need to have 80% of the people in that street need to be men. Otherwise it will look, quote unquote, unrealistic. And I'm sure this has changed over time, but it says a lot about like how we perceive the reality and how we think reality is and should be. I want to show you just a short clip, and then we'll have a bit of time to discuss about this, I think. And it's an ad for panty liners for women, and I just want you to look at it and just like note down what your first reaction is to it, and then we can discuss it after. Let's see if I can get it to play though. There you go. Great. Okay, so I'd love to build in like a short pause to just hear your thoughts. Maybe you can just write in the chat kind of your first gut when you see this video. And then after that, I would love to hear from you what issue comes to mind for any of you about what you feel is misrepresented in the media, in books, in films, in advertisement, in podcasts, in newspapers, you name it, anything. The name of this ad is, I think, yeah, No Blood Should Hold Us Back. Pebbles.
So, how much time do you think that they should be given to discuss about this?
I would say let's just chat. Let's just put in the chat and we can see how
Okay.
we go. And maybe
Sure.
people want to just
Chat is good.
verbally add
As
to what
well.
they're writing.
It's a big roundtable discussion. If feel free, any of you like have anything to voice up. People are thinking.
So maybe I ask you something else. I'm just curious. So how many of you feel like you've seen women represented in an ad in this way, say at least 3 times before in your life? Just raise your hand if you feel like you've seen it before. I'm just clicking through. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Okay. And so from the people who have their hands up, did you see it on national television or did you see it on YouTube? You can write it in the chat maybe, because I only can see 6 people at a time. Yeah. YouTube. Okay, so I'm not sure how it is for most of you, but when I grew up, most ads for panty liners were about women getting ready for dates, and most laundry detergent commercials were about women doing the laundry and then their husband coming home with a suitcase. I think the thing that is interesting when we think about representation is that really how the way we represent things becomes how we think about them in the long term, right? And so the reason that this isn't a normal ad is because apparently women aren't being portrayed as, you know, people who sport, people who take risks, people who fall on their knees. And that matters massively for how we think about women, and then also for many people in the end, how we think about equality, how we think about the differences between men and women, how we think about the power that women might hold, all these sorts of things. I'm going to continue because I have more questions that I'd love to get your input on.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Yeah. You said like how we represent things in campaign become how we think of them later. Mm-hmm. Was it this or the other way? How like did the campaign reflect the society or like the other way around?
Yeah, I don't think it's per se like how NGO campaigns represent the world. I think it's generally, let's see. So there's kind of 2 pieces here, right? Like one is just that a lot of campaigns push for like, not per se the campaigns that ask for policy change, right? Not when we ask the EU to adopt a climate law or to stop a trade deal with the Amazon, or when we ask the NGO of Total to, you know, stop a pipeline. Those are like campaigns that are really focused on policy change. But policy is only one way to create change in the world. That's a way of creating change in the world, kind of top down, where you ask a government or like a government or a business to make a change. But in the end, it is what we use, what we buy, what we put our money in, what our pension funds invest our money in, that really creates the change. Because the money in the end just comes from people, right? Like there's a lot of other money, but in the end, you know, what we do matters a ton. How we vote matters a ton, especially right now, I would say. And so the way that we vote, the way that we consume, is highly dependent on how we see the world. And then how we see the world is based on what we see, right? Like it is based on the books your parents read to you when you were small about whether, you know, your parents believed that you could do anything or not. It's based on whether in school you know, your teacher used to say, I'm just taking this as an example because it's fairly, you know, most of you will be familiar with it, but, you know, if in school people say boys will be boys, or like, you know, tell the girls to all sit still while they're sending the boys out to play because they can't sit still. Like there's many of these things that just based on what we see, we start acting in a certain way, right? Like how, if this is how you see women, how they're portrayed in this ad, how likely is it that you, maybe it's a question, right? Like if women would be portrayed in a completely different way, would we have less problems with inequality? Would we have less Me Too? Would we have, you know, would people vote for different leaders? Would abortion be something that women can decide on by themselves? It's questions you can ask. And I'm, you know, I'm not here to tell you what the answer is because I don't know the answer either. But what I do believe is that how we see it ultimately affects what happens in the world. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to continue slowly. I still have a lot that I want to tell you, but I'm going to try to go through it quick. The second part around culture campaigning is more around what I think you can do using the internet, and this can be big or small. So let's start with like a kind of controversial one that I'm sure most of you have seen and that a lot of people have different ideas about. And it is the black squares that got posted during Black Lives Matter, where people across the globe started posting a black square with the hashtag Black Lives Matter. And initially it was started by the music industry as the show must be paused, basically as a clear signal saying, okay, we are collectively standing up for this. We cannot be posting, you know, selfies, drinking wine at the beach, or, you know, doing, you know, fun concerts while there's people being killed in the streets, and policymakers, especially in the US at that moment, were not taking appropriate action. And it started as something that was about awareness raising, right? But then there was also a lot of pushback because people started using the hashtag Black Lives Matter instead of Blackout Tuesday, meaning that they were actually drowning out, like downing, literally putting down in the news feed all the content that was about the protests that people needed. There was, you know, information about police brutality during protests that was being downed that became invisible to people, meaning that people were being put in danger in that way. There were people filming things on the street that had to be taken to court to, you know, like sue police officers that couldn't be found anymore because there were just so many people posting these black squares. And then after that happened, kind of the good thing of the internet happened, which is that everyone started texting each other and like commenting to each other's posts saying, hey, please remove the hashtag because this is what's happening and this is why it's not working, right? The reason that I think it's interesting is because you can ask yourself here, right? Is this a virtue signaling? Is this, you know, people just like making an expression of a moral value just to kind of enhance their own image? Is it tokenism? Is it something where we're just doing something performative and symbolic to show that we care about something while really we're not taking the actions that we should be taking? You know, the same happened, like something, not the same, but like something in response to this was also that a lot of like websites like ASOS and Zalando started using a lot of Black and POC models after the whole movement started up, and some people were saying, look, this is not true, this is just tokenism. And other people were saying, okay, this is a vicious cycle where, you know, we have been representing models as white models for way too long, and this is a good moment to, you know, take this as an opportunity in the world, a moment in the world where we're going to change that. And so again, there's no right or wrong, but it's a way, it's something to think about, right? Like, are you breaking a vicious cycle? Are you creating lasting change? Or are you, you know, is this just like a virtue signaling, a tokenism? The good side of something similar to the black squares that had a really good effect was that it actually, a few weeks before that happened, K-pop. It's a Korean, I don't know, artist, called on all their fans to start posting really random content with the hashtag White Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter. And in that way, they actually drowned out racist content. So they started drowning out all the opposition to the Black Lives Matter movement, which arguably was really good, because a lot of people get into this kind of content in kind of a rabbit hole, right? They just keep searching and searching and find more and more and more content. And so they become more and more and more racist, because they see all this hate content, fake news, anything like conspiracy theories. So that's one where it worked really well. Another culture movement that you've all heard about is the Me Too movement, where of course there were requests for policy change, for education, for funding, but it was a lot about creating awareness and creating a space for women to stand up and say, this wasn't your fault, it wasn't how you dressed, there's more of us out there, and this is an issue that needs to be addressed. These are big movements, kind of bigger things that happened out there. I think the last months we've also seen a lot, especially on the back of the Black Lives Matter movement rising up. I've seen so many examples of people standing up on social media and really using their personal space and their personal accounts to start pushing for change and to just influence a few people around them. One of them is, if we just look at a personal basis, it's just about being involved, right? A lot of people have lately said that silence is just a privilege, and silence can even be implied as agreeing. I've seen people, sharing their own learning curve when they were learning about racism, the history of racism, doing polls saying, my God, I never heard of this. I can't believe I've never heard of this. Did you know this? I've seen people then sharing what they learned in kind of PSAs or like posts where they just like take terms and, explain them. People even sharing drafts of ways you can raise issues of racism at work. People sharing sources, sharing links to donate. There's increasingly theme accounts, not so much about this particular issue, at least I haven't seen them yet, but like there's a lot of like veganism accounts, for instance, right? Which is really driven by people just cooking really delicious food and inspiring others to cook delicious food as well, rather than telling them you should do this or you shouldn't do that. And all these things together, I think, really can inspire people. I saw this post that I really loved, saying, if you've ever wondered what you would do during slavery, the Holocaust, or the civil rights movement, you're doing it right now. And of course, we are in a different period, but I think it's a great reminder that you are who you are today. you are what you do and what you do today, and it's I think it's a beautiful reminder that we all have that power to do something. Finally, and then I'm gonna kind of go through quick because I feel like I'm going too long. There's something around employee rebellions, people standing up within their companies and asking for change. Bigger ones are like 500 employees of Facebook staging a virtual workout to protest like the Trump posts that weren't taken down, even though they were violating policies. There's a lot of like shareholder rebellions and investor rebellions, for instance, around executive pay, but also about things like oil pipelines. But there's something smaller, right? There's the opportunity to bring something up in a meeting with your colleagues. There's something around, raising it when you see a risk or have a worry about something that you're doing that feels off, that you think, you need to look into deeper. There's something around, suggesting hiring an expert on diversity if you feel your company is, not addressing something properly and you personally don't feel qualified to make proper recommendations. There's lots of things that you can kind of do alone. And that brings me to the end of this presentation. It was long even for me, so I apologize. It was actually a lot longer than I thought. And it's a quote by Alice Walker, who said that the most common way that people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. And this kind of goes back for me to why I started working at Avaz and why I made that change, going from marketing to to working for this type of movement. And it's really based on this belief that the change is who we are, and if each of us can be inspired to make one change about just one topic that we care about ourselves, and to then inspire 3 other people around us to also make some sort of change in their lives, that is how the world changes. They say that there are 6 degrees of separation, right? The idea that we're all only 6 handshakes away from each other, and that by 6 handshakes you can connect with anyone in the world. And I think that really goes back to that power. Don't think anyone is a saint. I don't think anyone think there's something around people thinking that they need to do everything, and that if you do, if you stop flying but you still eat meat, you're a hypocrite and that shouldn't be good. But then there's also many people saying that if you're a hypocrite, it's because you care. And I still, I still think that if everyone just picks one thing, we can do a whole lot better as a human species on this planet. That's it. I would love to hear from all of you.
I would actually like to ask the first question. Thank you, Alice. I give you audible clap. For me, I'm super happy to have you speak to all of us about all your inspirations and your work. Very inspiring. And I'm personally also very curious about, the last part of what you concluded with is like if all of us can create a change. And the thing is like now in the time of pandemic and all this social distancing, you're talking about the handshake. So like, and also relative or relevant to the current project they are working on, which is like shifting kind of a physical experience or even a cause. Like we can't go out on the streets, to do like protests as much as we wanted now. Like the world is burning down, and yet like people are kind of stuck at home, unable to really go out there, hold a sign up and join this kind of riots if they wanted to because of COVID. Hence, I mean, this entire module is designed around the idea of like, how can we kind of propel power from each of us, like them in working in groups to come up with perhaps an online narrative or online protest. How do you think that in this different time, can people make change and being online? Where to begin?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. There's also not one answer, right? Like, I think you probably find the best answer by brainstorming this, because I'm sure everyone has great ideas on how to do this. My few cents are that I'm more and more convinced that I think the most effective and efficient way to create change is often to join a group that already exists and that already pushes for change. I think we can do a lot more as a collective than we can do alone. In the end, humans are social species, right? We do work in groups, we do work in teams. That is why, there's been so much development over the course of our existence. And so really my first gut would be, nothing happens without you signing petitions. Nothing happens without you taking more actions when, groups, not just of us, but like some of us, like, there's so many, like change.org, some of us, World Wildlife Foundation, Doctors Without Borders, UNICEF, like you name it, like SOS. There's so many. You can find a bunch of great organizations in pretty much any issue in the world. And I think really, we need people to sign petitions. That's what it starts with. That's the most basic thing. It really matters, because if you don't have a mandate, if you don't have that, there's nothing else you can do. Same with donations, right? Like you can't buy up smart ad space if you don't have people helping to fund it. I think the other one though is on quite a personal level. Like I think it starts with figuring out what you really care about. What do you care about? If you could do one thing that you could change, right? If you could inspire other people to one thing, what would it be? And then you can pick if you want to do a theme account about it, if you want to share, you know, sources, if you want to share your own learning curve, if you want to, you know, you can do anything and everything, really. You can build art installations, like you can find a moment for something and like share an image that could go viral. You can send it to a newspaper and say, hey, I made this, do you want to use it? Yeah.
And do you have a kind of pro tip on where to start strategizing? Because I think it would have been amazing that if we would have that time, perhaps not so much, but if there isn't like kind of the time to go into this deep discussion, where do you think all of them could start, like in terms of strategizing or picking a cause? Because there are a lot of people out there.
Okay, so let's do this. Change the world and start with yourself, right? So if each one of you could pick one thing you want to change in your own life that you feel could make a positive impact, and it could be anything, what would it be? I think let's start with that. You can write it in the chat. If you want to keep it to yourself, that's also fine. But it would be great to have some in the chat, because then we can use them as examples.
And I urge anyone who also feel like speaking up, you can take that space while the rest are writing as well. Feel free, the space is yours.
Yeah, okay, so I have a question. I'm thinking about safety. So I'm a blockchain engineer, as well as doing this video program that I'm here for. And I've been teaching how to rebuild industries so that people can join alternate financial industries instead of being a part of these ones that we have that in some or that frequently have systemic problems. And at a certain point, when you're making change, you enter an unsafe environment, because then the powers, they don't want you to become more powerful with your new systems, or they don't want the groups that you're teaching to actually build these new things, for example. And I'm wondering if you have any ideas on safety when you're trying to change, like when people are, for example, trying to hack you or prevent you, like threats and things like that, and prevent you from doing your mission. Yeah, thanks.
As an organization or as a person?
As a person, if you're like an independent change maker, like me, that's a kind of like a hacker or builder. I'm working with a bunch of organizations and I'm teaching organizations, but I'm a part of like a network of individuals collaborating globally, and we don't have any central safety source except from our nation's legal system. Yeah, so I wonder if there's maybe an organization for that too, that, or just thoughts and ideas based on your experience.
Gosh, I mean, I'm just gonna skip here. Just if you want, write me an email and I'd be happy to also ask your security team about it. But like, just, I mean, and I think you probably know this better than I do, to be honest, but like the things that come up for me is like 2FA on all your passwords. Just make sure that you always use an authenticator to get into your things. Make sure that you have all your passwords saved in LastPass or something like that, you know, like LastPass is something I think most of you know, but it's a great tool. It basically allows you to have one master password and to have really secure passwords for everything else. Helps you to log in, make sure it's very hard to hack your password. One is using like a VPN. I'm sure most of you have that as well, even if it's just to make sure you can use Netflix from different countries, or, you know, that would be my main things. And like, be careful what you post online. But you guys are studying at Hyper Island, so I'm sure you're all aware of that. Yeah, I wouldn't post my home address. there's more that you can do, of course, especially if you work in an organization. But yeah, for security, I would not be the expert. But send me an email and I'd be happy to connect you.
Okay, thank
Just looking in the chat, more equality and safety for women, censorship and unethical data. I want my kids to grow up in a safer, more fair world, clean up and save the ocean. Okay, that's great. So I see a bunch of things in here that feel very like concrete to me, right? Like eat less meat, or it's actually probably the most precise one I see here. Clean up and save the ocean. Censorship and unethical data. So that's great. So we have some really good issues here as well. So I'm wondering if you have an issue, right? Like censorship and unethical data, Pebbles. What can you do yourself to work on that issue? Or someone wrote, you know, I want my kids to grow up in a safe and more fair world. Like, what's the things that you can do? What, like, you know, it also doesn't need to be one single thing, but what's 3 things you want to do, right? So just to give you an example, like, I tremendously care about climate change. So what do? Like, the 3 things that I personally feel passionate about is like eating, you know, plant-based as much as I can, try to fly less, and buy pretty much everything I own in terms of clothing in secondhand and vintage stores. And then I try to talk about it with other people, not by telling them that they have to do the same thing, but by just, you know, sharing the fun stories of taking the train that could inspire other people to try and take the train. You know, when people say, oh, I like your shirt you're wearing, I can say, thanks, I bought it secondhand, or like, I remade it from whatever, right? And those are ways in which you can do something. Like, if you care about safety, like voting is one of them, and inspiring other people to vote. If you care about, you know, equality, you could start sharing sources with other people on social media. You could create an account even to talk about those sorts of things. So I'm just like curious what those things are for you. They could really be anything.
Questions more? And I have a question, so related to their project, because they have this like virtual museum, like a beta human museum. If they were to come up with a narrative or a cause, and do you generally advise it should be more specific? That is easier to be specific than to try to reach out to the mass on a bigger campaign idea. And now that if it's online, so like kind of is immediately global and very accessible, but strategically, do you think it's good to be more targeted nonetheless?
No, so it's a museum. So you're all building a, what can you tell me more about it, Pebbles? Like, is it an image they're creating then? Or you are all
You
creating?
can create an artistic expression, can be a digital installation.
Yeah.
Or that can be a journalistic approach with, maybe they want to come up with a fake TV broadcast. They can the role of like playing up, you know, be a comedian interviewing a politician and try to perform the narratives, you know, in a theatrical way. So it's kind of open as of now. So like it's much more of like deciding the cause, as you said, you know, what is the cause and how it's transformed and translated into different form is the process they have to kind of decide along the way. But to begin with, like, I think what is interesting you say is to pick a cause and how to strategize about deciding that cause should be specific or global.
Yeah, okay, I hear you. I think, you know, I'm hoping that throughout this presentation there's been like various examples of how you can do it, right? So one is by like, I'm just going to pull up a few. So one, of course, would be by coming up with a way in which you can do like an interactive way that other people can join into, that is smart and that helps to, you know, make a certain issue better. Like, for instance, the K-pop fans all joining this like hashtag Blue Lives Matter and White Lives Matters, just to draw out all the hatred content and all the racism. Another is around like representation. right? Which is a lot. I think representation, I really think this is about like the stories we tell each other. If we all keep telling each other that climate change can't be fixed, and that it's, you know, so many people in Europe tell me, what Europe does doesn't matter, it matters what China does. And then China says, it doesn't matter what we do, it matters what the US does. And as long as everyone keeps giving all their power away and says, oh, it's not up to us, and everyone then keeps looking at each other, pointing fingers at each other and saying they're not doing it, so we are also not doing it, nothing is going to happen, right? And it's and I think like a part of that is around like taking back your own power and your own freedom and your own right to fight for something you care about. The other one is around like what stories are empowering. What stories do we want to tell each other that can make a difference, right? And so rather than saying, rather than screaming on top of your lungs, women aren't being represented in the right way, or like, you know, like trans women's lives matter, like you can also create things that establish that in the world, right? That show that create a different story for people to connect with, to change their mind on, to discuss. And it's, you know, it's a personal choice, I think, if you want to shock people into having a discussion about something, if you want to inspire people to have conversation about something or to create a change. Yeah, I think, you know, another way is you could, of course, create like some sort of ad or a meme that you want to go viral on social media, right? Like make a great meme about an issue that really represents what's going on and that people can see and that they understand, right? Like make one of these like PSAs that like give you like 5 slides with different types of racial microaggressions and their effects, and like help to educate other people. You know, make a theme account and start inspiring each other on what you can make vegan that is easy, quick, and delicious and makes you healthy and strong. Like so much you can do. There's really not a one-way answer here.
Amazing, thank you. And Karya has a question.
Yes, thank you for your inspirational speech and presentation. No, I wrote it in the chat. I am from Iran, and most of the times I find these type of, like, to be active as an Iranian is quite hard, especially if you're like living abroad and not in Iran, because in Iran no one can, like, I mean they are active, but they go to jail if they're like protesting or everything, and it feels like most of the time like there's not so much action done in like other countries for Iran. So I always like feel like that I'm not heard. And yeah, I mean, of course I can post something on Instagram, but at the same time it even like makes my friend in Iran or like my relatives in Iran a little bit more angry, because they're like, ah, but you're like in a safe place and you can of course share it. But for me it's like, okay, if there's a situation in Iran, maybe I can inform some people that I have around me here so that they know that it's not only, you know, first world country, or like there are stuff going on in other countries that need to be considered as a problem. And yeah, also like the name of us, for me it sounds, it is Persian, right?
Yeah, it means voice in a lot of different languages. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, okay, so I think there's a few parts to the answer. The first part is around like geopolitics and whether you can influence Iran, right? Which is again like, it's not that easy. I have to admit that I'm not fully across it, but I'd love to talk about it with you more if you're interested. There's also a lot of people who know a lot about it, but it's yeah, it's not like there's I don't want to say anything that I'm wrong about, so I'm a bit hesitant because I'm like, I think it's like this, but I'm not sure if it's like this. But there is some sort of relationships, right, between that whole like block and the MENA, where there's like Israel and there is Russia, there's Saudi Arabia, there's the Yemen issue, there's like a lot of issues there that are all very much tied together. There's a lot of money involved, a lot of oil involved, and so there's also a lot of actors backing Iran and that want to keep Iran as it is, which makes it harder to make change. at the same time, I think you're totally right. I think it's one of those issues that people find really hard to understand. People don't even know where to start reading into it. And like, I understand that there's frustration for some people when you're somewhere else and you write about it, but then also I think that's a big danger I see in the world right now, where people are yelling at each other on social media. You know, people are saying, you know, there's a lot of this like, silence is ignorance, you know, like silence is agreeing to something, but then there's also like other people saying, if you post about it, it's going to be virtue signaling, and like, this is just symbolism, where's the real action? And there's just a lot of people yelling. And I think my main hope is just that people don't let themselves be silenced by it, because I think we really need people to speak up and speak out and share and inspire and share their feelings. Yeah. I will follow, like, please share your Instagram if you're going to share about it. I will follow you.
Yeah. Yeah, and like
when
when you talked about memes, I was thinking that the only time that I saw memes about Iran was the World War III thing, and it was crazy. Like,
Yeah.
I was panicking and people were like making jokes out of it, so it wasn't that nice.
Yeah. Let's connect. I have some people who are who share really great things about it. But yeah, send me a personal message and then I'll connect you, or just send them to you. Need to look them up. Thank you. I'm just seeing here. I'm just reading more in the Skype, what is it? Zoom chat. But please, yeah, feel free to add more questions.
Yeah. And if you guys don't mind, since Alice started a bit later, we can have a bit of like 10 minutes of a run. And only if for some of you whom needs to go, you can make a silent exit. But for those whom are still keen, please stay on. I would love that 10 minutes for Alice to continue to exchange some of the questions and answers. So feel free, yeah?
Great. Made a list of some films. I'm just gonna plug it in here. I'm not sure about you guys, but I always love watching films about things that you know, that I've like came across in my day. So if you feel like you want to continue just thinking about some things, if you want to see more inspiration of what activism can look like for different topics, this is a very non-conclusive, very limited list of films, but they are just the films that my attention was drawn to lately again, and I think they're really good. If you want to screenshot, and yeah, I'm sure many of you know many of them, but I'm also going to stop screen sharing, if that's okay with everyone, so I can see you all.
Yeah.
Cool. Yes. Hi. I see faces.
Maybe you can ask them a question instead of them asking you. What are you?
I mean, I'm curious for your ideas. I'm curious to hear what you want to do, like both for this, what's it called, virtual museum, but maybe even more, I'm just curious what you want to do. What do you want to do with your life? Aside from just, you know, like eat good food, have lots of friends, live in a nice home, have a job that pays well and gives you good benefits. Like, what do you want to do?
Big question, right?
Big question, but it's also so, you know, what do you want to do in the next 5 years? You can change your life so many times over, but
if we're all still alive in 5 years. Yeah.
I have a question for you, Alice, if I can.
Yeah, please.
Do you ever feel overwhelmed by all the things that are going wrong in the world? And like, there's some issues that you can't really do anything about, like the Uyghurs in China, and also like the children being caged in the US. And it's really hard to do something about that. I mean, but what do you feel about that? Is it?
Yeah, that's a good question. Oh man, I think definitely I feel anxious. I think I feel less anxious now that I work in an organization that does something, and I feel like I do something. I think for that matter, action is really a great kind of antidote to anxiety and fear, to just know that you're doing your part. Yeah, I think it reminds me of conversations we're having about hope, or that I had about hope with some people, that hope can be something external, right? It can be hoping for something in the world to change, or for someone else to change, or for something to happen, but I also believe there's a hope just in yourself, that you can know that whatever happens with an issue, even if everything, you know, stops to exist, if everyone around you drops dead, that you know that you are standing on, you know, the side of the fight that you want to fight for, and to know that you are going to be true to yourself, whatever happens around you. I think that's a different type of hope that really helps with my anxiety, at least. The more practical side of it, I think, is that I personally prefer not reading the news all the time. I'd rather just pick an issue and, you know, pick one issue a week even, and just read a longer article about that issue every morning. And then the week after, pick another topic, than that I'm constantly, you know, seeing kind of the news feed, the literal news feed of the world with all its drama. So I kind of try to take moments for that.
That's really
and
good.
then also, I think, yeah, most people are addicted to their phones. I am too, but I think it is a huge anxiety inducer for many people. Yeah, we wake up with it, we go to sleep with it. Most of us, I'm sure, go to the bathroom with it. It's kind of crazy, right? But yeah.
There's this article that says, I think on Wired or something, how it melted how phones melted the brains of a generation, because like a whole generation has grown up with like a whole different neurological setup, I think, because we are so addicted to our phones.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, totally. Thank you for your question. Anyone else? Pierre Gorgas. I think I saw you before doing something, but I'm not sure if you were saying hi, if you had a question.
I just said hi. I was doing like this.
Okay. Hi.
But yes, thank you a lot for this. Super inspiring. And when you ask us like what we want to do, it's probably, I think I can talk for all of us, like we want to do so much.
I know that feeling very well.
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna sound so old when I say this, but I feel like the older I get, the more I realize that you can do so many things, you just can't do them all at once. And it's I find it a hard one to practice, because I usually want to do everything at once, but also more and more like kind of chilling out with this idea that you can just do something for like 3 years or 5 years, or even like 3 months, and then just move to the next thing. Yeah.
One more question before? Don't be hesitant, even if it's a half-baked question.
I have a question that surrounds like how much is put on the individual, and how much should we like think that the state should take care of, like, or the collective. And if we are supposed to feel guilty if we don't take part of, like, you know, this question of like how much is the individual supposed to try to change the world, and how much can you just sit back and watch other people do it?
Yeah, shit, that's a big question. I mean, gosh, I mean, I don't believe in guilting other people. I think that's one thing. I don't think people respond to being made feel guilty, or being made feel shamed or inadequate or not enough. Like, I don't think that's what's going to make people change. I think we all, like, right, if you're in a fight with someone, are you going to listen to them when they're yelling at you? Like, I usually just want to leave the room, right? So for me, it's like, I think it's inspiration that creates change for most people, and awareness, right? Like, ignorance is a choice, and so just being aware of what's happening, I think is a big thing for the individual level. I do think, though, that if you do feel guilt, it is, you know, all feelings have a function, guilt has a function. If you feel guilt, it's probably because you're doing something that isn't aligned with what you believe in, or what you want to stand for, or what you feel about the world, right? And so I do think, like, if there's guilt, I try to listen to it personally. then I'm like, how much do we need to do versus the governments? Like, I don't know. Like, I really don't think you can do everything. I know that I've gone through many motions of feeling like I need to do everything. Like, I both shouldn't fly, shouldn't eat animal produce, and shouldn't buy new clothes, and shouldn't buy new other stuff, and like had such a long list of things that I felt I shouldn't do, and it just doesn't make the world like more fun. Doesn't make life more fun. And I do think there's like a calibration there. Like, there's a lot of things that I can do that can add to your life and doesn't need to subtract from it, right? Like, for me, vegan food was one of them. I'm not fully vegan, but I eat, I would say, like 95% vegan. And for me, it's been like really fun. Like, I feel healthier. I've learned to cook in a lot of new ways. Like, it's a lot of fun. It's like a game. Yeah, how much do we do? How much does business do? How much do governments do? I would love for governments and businesses to do a lot more, but I think we need to push them.
And Alice, would you think that besides joining the causes, signing petitions, do you think there is still hope in trying to inspire and work with the evil companies? Like, instead of only joining
like, you mean
the good sides, but then what about, infiltrating into the dark side and trying to inspire them from the inside? You think there's still hope for that?
Yeah, definitely. Like, the first answer is yes, definitely. I think, like I said before, like, I think if every single company in the world would just have one person that would stand up for what they care about, that would be brave and bold and bring things up and say, this feels wrong, or this feels off, or shouldn't we try this? Or one person that goes the extra mile and tries to present something in a different way, that can make a huge change. Because, people trust their friends and their colleagues over strangers. And so, if you work for one of those companies, they're going to listen to you more than they're going to listen to me if I work at a Vaz, right? But having that said, I don't think that should become, let's put it this way. I think if you work for a company or a goal that you really don't believe in and that you disagree with, it's gonna, it's great if you stand up for it, but eventually I think it's, it's going to hunt you a little bit. Like, you're going to feel that it's just not your place, and that you don't want to put your time and your energy and your, excellence and creativity into something, even if you do speak up and speak out. But I have a lot of hope for the world. That feels like a different question. Like, I think we're on a crossroads, right? Like, there's all these memes going around that 2020 is like the worst year on history, right? But also, like, there's just never been, like, just to give you the other side of Corona, like, there's never been this much money on the table to create change. Like, a lot of big economies need to start from scratch, or not from scratch, but like need to rebuild from a very low point, meaning that all of a sudden there is trillions and trillions on the table that can be spent in a certain way, and where we can say, we want you to only spend it in this way, or we do not want you to spend it on that, or we want you to bail out people, not companies, or, we don't want you to bail out airlines, we want you to instead invest in train lines. Like, there's so much money on the table. The other thing is that, like, like oil prices have plummeted, like fossil fuel prices have plummeted the last months because they have all this old machinery. They need a lot of space to store things, right? It's an incredibly old school system. And so if there's no one taking it, if all production lines stop because people aren't buying things, people aren't traveling, and so there's no energy needed, and so the coal is not needed, so the coal piles up, and they literally have just like warehouses like full of coal, and it just becomes more and more expensive for them to keep, right? And so if there's ever been a better moment, at least in terms of climate change, to make change happen, it's now. Like, I really believe it's now. There's a lot happening.
Thank you, Alice. I guess I can see there are a lot of still very curious and inspired faces. Well, unfortunately, it's time. So I guess we can. You have shared. Yes, thank you. You read my mind. Ellie's email is on the chat, but all her information will also be on the workbook with all the speakers' bio and information. So keep the conversation going. I know that a lot of you would have very much of curiosity towards the work Alice does, or even herself as a person. She's a great human being. Yeah, so like keep the line going, and please come back for the afternoon session. Too bad Alice cannot join us, but there's a lot to discuss about. And thank you everyone for being such attentive people this morning. I note the difference in how attentive you are. And that makes Alice you a very captivating speaker.
Thank you all for having me. It was really, really fun getting to know you a little bit. And I don't think I can make it this afternoon, Pebbles, but let's chat. I would love to try and see if I can somehow make space in my day for it. And everyone, please do reach out if you want to just have questions, or just feel free to send me an email or reach out anywhere else. Would love to connect.
Thank you so much, Alice. And
everyone, good luck with everything. Enjoy your days.